So today on Lessons in Leadership, we have Jamie Mead, the Chief Executive of Talaria, a Melbourne-based asset manager with clients across the globe. Jamie, it's great to have you on the show today.
Paul, thanks so much for the invitation to join you. Looking forward to having a chat.
Great. I think, Jamie, to start off, we ask everybody the same question. And that's really, can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your career and how you've ended up in the hot seat today as Chief Executive at Talaria?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, it's one of those seats where you pinch yourself sometimes that it's got your name on the back of it. So yeah, well, very happy to share. I started as a banker back at originally in a graduate class into Morgan Stanley, which was a fantastic introduction into the industry. From there, I went to Goldman and performed a pretty similar role. Both those roles were based in London. So after that, I left banking and decided that I wanted to have a look at what asset management was. And I was offered the opportunity to join a very large multi-strategy hedge fund, which was based, well, headquarters was in Minneapolis and had offices in London and also in Hong Kong. So I spent a few years there, passed into the GFC. Had the rather incredible experience of sitting on a structured credit and credit derivatives desk as we entered 2007, 2008. So you really had the opportunity to see the GFC hitting up front and very, very close. And then in 2008 through 2009 was part of a team that launched a new hedge fund by the name of Tyrus Capital. And we were very fortunate in the way that we were able to raise assets and make that business very, very successful. After 7 years with Tyrus Capital, I left Tyrus. I left mainland Europe, where I was based at the time, and moved down to Melbourne and was fortunate to join an organization called Wingate Asset Management. Wingate Asset Management, I was invited to run the asset management part, the equities asset management part of their business. A large Melbourne-based institution. And after a couple of years there, offered to buy the business. So with some partners here who are partners in the business still, we MBO'd that business and we turned that business into Talaria, which is the business that I am the chief exec, as you rightly say, of today, Paul.
So tell us a little bit about Talaria, Jamie, and what you guys do for your clients.
Yeah, so Talaria, we're a global equity fund manager. And I'm aware that when I say this, this is something that almost every fund manager in the world says, we do things a little differently. And the way that we do things a little differently as a long-only equities manager is that every equity that enters our portfolio starts life as a put option. So a component of the capital that we deploy on behalf of our investors is earning a contracted rate of return priced by volatility. Now, ironically, what that actually does is it very significantly dampens the volatility profile of our fund. So when I say we do things differently, we have a very unique trade-off risk-reward volatility within our portfolio. We harvest volatility to lower volatility, and yet we still offer, even though it's almost a contracted rate of return, so a high amount of income that we distribute each and every quarter to our investors. On top of that, we earn an equity-like return. So it's a pretty unique strategy. As far as we're aware, there are only a handful of people, rest of world, that deploy capital in the way that we do. And it's pretty exciting to be down here in Melbourne, yet still engaged in global markets each and every day of our lives.
And how do you find that, being based in Melbourne and working in global markets? Are there any benefits to it? Are there any negatives to it?
There are significant benefits in that the manner in which we undertake to perform our investment analysis, we don't believe in privileging sell-side research. And so as a consequence for us, the reality is if we have access to a computer screen and we can download the company annual report, we can perform almost all of the research that it requires to come up with a calculation of intrinsic value for the equity that we want to put into the portfolio. Now, the fact that we live in Melbourne and are able to do that from a lifestyle perspective is certainly better. The fact that we're able to be in Melbourne And as many of your viewers and many of your listeners will know, Melbourne really is the epicenter of the superannuation industry here in Australia. And at almost $3 trillion worth of assets, having proximity into allocators of that size, of that ilk, of that sophistication, of that global awareness, that's a great thing to have access to as an asset manager, as a fund manager.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we had Stephen Rowe from Vision Super on the show a couple of months ago now, and you know, he was extolling the virtues of Melbourne and been there as you know, one of the largest super funds.
Yeah, absolutely. And Paul, I think that, you know, the other thing that I would add to that, which is an important part of our Talaria story, is that all of us, certainly the principals in our business and most of our senior team members, are globally experienced. So we have learned our trade, we have plied our trade in London, in New York, in Hong Kong, in those deep global centers of capital. And we, by choice now, choose to be here in Melbourne. It's a great city to call home, and to have the privilege to be engaged in global markets each and every day, yet to be based here is a privilege that we hold very dearly.
No, I can understand that. The work-life balance has always seemed very good when I've been there. You know, the bars, the restaurants, the cultural experiences have been in Melbourne. I think it's a great city to be in.
Between us, we sound like we're advocating for the Melbourne Tourist Board here, Paul.
we do a little, yeah, although they're not allowed to sell us anything at the moment, are they? Because we can't come and visit. So, Jamie, what would you say are the key leadership lessons you've learned throughout your career?
I think you've got to start to answer that question by defining what leadership is, Paul. I mean, it can be a very nebulous concept, and it means different things to different people. I've been incredibly fortunate. The companies that I've worked for, you know, some of the biggest investment banks in the world, and then working at huge multi-billion US dollar funds in the past, the access to leadership and the proximity to leadership has been incredibly informative and constructive for the role that I perform now. If I were to distill what my concept of leadership is now, I would say, and I'll try and simplify here for the purposes of not spending too much time answering the question, frankly. Leadership for me is about defining a vision. Now, there's a lot of inputs that go into defining what that vision is, but at the point in time that you have a vision and you commit to the vision, the second component of that is lifting people up and taking them on the journey of delivering to that vision. Now, that's part salesperson. I encourage my team to see this vision. It's about positioning it, though, not really as a sell, more as something which can be understood. And if the people in your team truly understand what it is and truly commit and truly align themselves with that vision, then your role as a leader is arguably more than halfway there. The people in all of our businesses are the most important thing, and having that commonality of purpose, as we distill into vision, is a prerequisite for success in leadership, I would say.
And what would you say have been the sort of toughest challenges that you've gone through as a leader? You mentioned earlier when you were talking about the start of your career and then how you went through the GFC. Obviously, that had an impact on everybody around the world, and now we're in COVID times. What have been some of the sort of big challenges you've faced, and how have you overcome them?
I would say that going through that GFC, in fact, going through any crisis of sorts it's informative for you as a human being, let alone in this kind of seats that we occupy within this industry. And there are opportunities to really look at the people around you, to recognize strong leadership. And if you are in a privileged position where you are leading people, to really recognize in yourself the obligation to step up and obligate that responsibility. The components of doing that and doing that successfully through those times really are no different to navigating all the other times when you're responsible for leading an organization. So I would say that in times where you really have to, where there is some kind of external event which is testing the organization, in many instances, if you've put all the framework in place and you've got the right people in place, it's really a reversion to muscle memory. What have we trained to do? What is our playbook in this scenario? And what is the specific set of circumstances which define which section of the playbook we go to at this point in time? So through those periods, I think it's always easier. That is predicated by the fact that you have absolutely got the right people in the team and you have clearly communicated what those playbooks are.
Yeah, absolutely. I think training is interesting that you mentioned that there. You know, it's one thing that we often find is overlooked, or is done perhaps not to the benefit to stress test the organization. And therefore it's interesting that you bring up training. What sort of things do you do to develop the team?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, training I'll break down into a couple of things within the context of that question, Paul. So the first that I would say would be training within that context is actually a reversion to that which is practice. So in that instance, practice can be defined by process. It can be defined by framework. You know, if I show up every day and my stock analysis requirement is to step through 12 different things, those 12 things don't change because the market's down 10, 20, 30% overnight. They simply do not change. And in fact, it's incredibly important that they don't, that they are done in exactly the same way as defined in all times. So I think that's the first part of that. So, you know, deconstructing training into reversion to process. The second part of that, which I think is more relevant to, you know, how we evolve, and that can be the evolution of process, but equally, I think within the context of your question specifically, the evolution of our people. And the way that we believe, you know, really to give people the opportunity to improve is to give them a lot of latitude. Now, again, I'm going to say it again, that's predicated by ensuring that you've got the right people and that your people are, and this is referencing back to something that we've covered already, that your people are aligned to your vision. Because really the subcomponent of vision is strategy. And what you're empowering your people to do is deliver to strategy. Now, there's a requirement for tactics, which sit under that, and the execution thereof. So really the question that we're asking then is, do our people have the skills, the experience, and or the expertise to be able to deliver to each of those tactics? And then to sit above that perhaps and look at, is the strategy the right strategy to deliver to vision? So how do we invest in our people? As I said, we like to give them latitude and we like to give them the opportunity to grow themselves. So we will empower people to lead parts of our business, which are not necessarily the most commercially sensitive. However, it gives them an opportunity to build a more rounded skill set. So for instance, within Talaria over the last 24 months, I can think of two really good examples here. The first would be the development and the evolution of our philanthropic work. This started with more of a tactical component of work, and we empowered members of our team, not at our partnership level, quite certainly by design, members of each of the business units to be able to take philanthropy out and to define what that meant on behalf of Talaria. Now, the responsibility for doing that was, what were the requirements of the people who were doing that? They had to present a business case. They had to go out into the community and perform research, analysis, investigate. They were the face of Talaria, the face of our business. They then had to bring that work back in-house and present that to their colleagues and get buy-in that what it was that they were proposing was the right thing for us to do. Now, we feel that's quite a significant empowerment of our people. And across all those soft skills that they were required to deploy to make that successful, it was at the benefit of Talaria. It was at the benefit of the individual, and our organization, as a consequence, has evolved and improved. I can think of a second example, Paul, which is this will be the first year that we will run an internship program for university graduates and sort of, running into diversity channels here to try and offer people the opportunity to come and work with us. So the person that we've handed that initiative to is somebody that has earned that. They've shown that they're ready to step up and have a little bit more responsibility. But again, this is empowering. This is giving quite a lot of rope to somebody to demonstrate back to us, hey, I can do this. These are the components of skill set that in my day job, you don't give me the opportunity, or I don't have the opportunity to display that I have. But these are all key attributes of becoming more senior within our organization. Of course, there's that sort of situational training, if you like. And by the way, we feel that that's a great way for us and our people to really identify their strengths and their weaknesses. That is supplemented through more traditional learning and development initiatives. So we have people studying for various qualifications. We have access to online learning portals and all those sorts of things as well. That more sort of standard stuff that you'd expect.
I'd say it sounds like it's a nice mixture of the two. I think one of the things you said there, which was really interesting to me, was about giving people latitude, empowering people, enabling them to go out and build their soft skills and build their hard skills at the same time via the learning portals. But how do you go about maintaining compassionate leadership when things maybe aren't going so well, and when the individual isn't perhaps performing to the level that you would want them to perform at?
Arguably, the place that compassion starts and ends is honesty. And so if we are being transparent, if we are being honest, if we are clearly communicating at all times through the life cycle of somebody's tenure with Talaria, and for us, that tenure starts before they join the business. We start the first 6 months of work typically with our late stage candidates as they're interviewing us and we're interviewing them to prospectively come and partner with us and work and be part of our organization. And the reason for us doing that, Paul, is so that in that first 6 month period, there are no surprises on what mutual expectations are. Now, if we start with that level of transparency, and if we do that effectively, that sets a lovely precedent for that first 6 months, but equally every conversation, every interaction, every community style forum that we facilitate on behalf of our people to be honest. And so, to your question, if there's a situation where we have to table something which is, hey, this isn't up to standard, how do we do that compassionately? Well, typically that isn't just a wild idiosyncratic event which has led to that. Poor performance begets poor performance, and great performance begets great performance. We know that. That's behavioral. And so I would say that compassion through honesty is the starting point for that. And that's really important. I mean, that's important to every organization, but that's incredibly important to us.
So we've talked a lot about the people there. How do you go about evaluating yourself as a leader?
I mean, just quickly on people, again, it's difficult to talk to some of this stuff without sounding cliched, but it's all we have. We don't make widgets. We don't make cars. We're not mining lithium down here in Australia to make batteries to put in whiz-bang future vehicles. People, that's all we have. And so everything we do revolves around people. To your question, how does one evaluate oneself? Well, it's a mixture of quantitative and qualitative. So if I refer back to some comments that I shared earlier and the way that we think about this, it's vision, strategy, tactics. Under vision, there are objectives, and we use strategy to deliver to those objectives. Now, simplistically, if those objectives are met, the vision has been successfully shared, the components of strategy which will drive to that vision being delivered have been successfully set up, and the tactics to execute to those strategy have been successfully delivered. So there are some quantitative objectives which are organizational at level, which myself, I'm largely responsible for those. So that's the quantitative bit, and that's frankly pretty easy if you've set that up and you follow those 3 steps and those 3 components. The qualitative stuff is obviously harder, and there we really have to ask ourselves the questions. Well, how do you define success as a leader? Is it in results? Is it something broader than that? Is it in the organizational health that you have within your business? And organizational health for us is a really important concept. We believe that an organization can be incredibly successful commercially, yet the organizational health can be poor. And for us, those 2 things, if that were the scenario here at Talaria, i.e. commercially we're very successful, our organizational health is poor, inevitably that responsibility sits with leadership within our business. And that would be a fail. How do we measure organizational health? And that really that's a much harder thing. So there's some things that I've referred to already that we do within our business. So we empower people to put themselves in leading and learning situations and take Talaria out into the community. That increases our organizational health. How can we measure organizational health? One of the ways is by brand recognition, brand value. There are ways that we can measure that. We can do that through our marketing and our comms team. They can say, your hit rate is up, your awareness is up, your PR profile is year on year, the growth of those sorts of things. But really the deconstruction of organizational health, and I'm going to go back to that same place again, is all about our people. And there's an element of intuition and an element of EI and a reliance on EI clearly there. Are people happy? Do people feel fulfilled? Do people feel, and it all gets a bit cyclical, do people feel aligned to the vision that we have? Do people feel good about that? Would people, various authors have written, would people come to work here even if they weren't paid? That's a great measure, right? And for people who really, really align to their vision, the vision of an organization, let's look in the not-for-profit sector. People who go to work, if you're a doctor and you go to work and you went to work even because if you weren't going to be paid, it would be because you aligned to the vision of what it is that you signed up for in the first place. People who work in the philanthropic sector, not-for-profit, etc. There's a real alignment for a lot of those areas to the people in those organizations and the vision of that organization. And I'm not trying to draw parallels quite clearly between what we do and some of those sectors. But I think as a thing to explore, as a thing to attempt to qualify what is our level of organizational health and how much do people really like being here, there are some interesting parallels there.
No, absolutely. And I think organizational health is an interesting concept. And I like the way you sort of split that down from commercial, but then also the non-commercial related stuff. I mean, we used to work with an organization which is in professional services, and their ethos was to make as much money as possible and to bill as many hours as possible. And they really did not care about, the other side of it. And it was really interesting. Their staff retention was awful. But people who stayed because they enjoyed making the money that they got paid. However, they lost 40% of their people every single year, which was costing them a fortune in recruitment costs. So it's really interesting to see that you're the opposite side, where you've really taken a considered approach to that, so that you have that consistency.
Absolutely. And Paul, our purpose at Talaria is to help individuals and organizations enjoy a more certain financial future. So the predominant way in which we can do that is by the provision of fund management services. That's our core capability. That's our core premise. But equally, through some of the work that we do out into the community, aside from being fund managers, we can help. We can help those communities. We can help those people in ways which are ancillary simply to the provision of a performance of an investment return. And that's sort of, we go up again. So we've got purpose and then we've got vision. And this is sort of the second way we think about this is purpose, vision, and values, which is obviously fairly commonly accepted. With our purpose there being about communities, organizationally, we can only be successful if we are genuinely intertwined with the communities that we serve. Now, that then sort of presents the additional, I think, consideration for us of, well, how can we serve the communities that we purport to be able to do so, unless we as an organization are representative of those communities? So I've referenced already, we're undertaking to do a minority groups, a underrepresented in finance opportunity for people to come and spend, at this point, it will be 2 4-week blocks. We'll run that across the summer period here in Australia. So in December and January, where we feel that people can allocate that time to come and have an opportunity to be part of what we do. And you know what, if those people go back into their communities and they never work in finance, that's great. That's absolutely fine. That's a fantastic thing. If we've allowed them to look at something and learn something, which otherwise they wouldn't have, that's absolutely fine. Now, the commercial alignment there for us is obviously, we hope that we find people who otherwise wouldn't have an opportunity to come and work in financial services. And if we do that, that's great. And there's absolute alignment of commercial interest if we can do that. And if that is something that is represented as a consequence of us undertaking this initiative. But I think you've got to stand for more than just the bottom line. I think if you really want to create something which is an enduring organization, then commercially it has to be there, but it has to be more than that to endure.
Absolutely. And you mentioned diversity there, and so many of our searchers these days are focused on diversity and ensuring that there's a diverse slate of candidates available to the organization when they're hiring. It's become so important worldwide. But I think one of the things which we often try and stress to our clients and we talk about a lot is inclusion, because diversity in its own right is great, but it's inclusion that is the glue that makes it all stick together. So how do you go about ensuring you've got that inclusive environment?
Yeah, again, first place that comes back to is transparency and honesty. So within our organization, if people have access to almost everything, and obviously there are some things within an organization which cannot be disclosed. Actually, in some organizations, they are disclosed. We're reading quite an interesting piece a couple of weeks ago about an organization which has a portal in its canteen. It's a Scandinavian company and it has a portal in the canteen, and anybody can log on and see the compensation details of any employee in the organization. Now, that's not how we do it at Talaria, but we do strive to make as much available as possible. That starts with access to senior leadership. If people feel that they have proximity to people who are making some of these decisions within the business, is one thing. The second thing, which obviously is incredibly important here, is that they feel that they can table really anything that's on their mind. So one of the things that we're very focused on at the moment is how do we make sure that everybody in the organization feels like they have a safe voice? Not to ask a daft question, because that's not what we're talking about. It's, hey, I've got a question, and you know what? You're going to feel probably a little bit uncomfortable about this, Jamie. Great. And one of the things that we say when we meet with prospective investors, when we meet with prospective counterparts, when we meet with prospective people who want to come and join our organization and be partners in our business, is you can ask us anything at all. And there's only 3 things that can be a response. Here's the answer, to the best of my knowledge. There's, I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that question, but I'll get back to you. And there's, I do know the answer to that question, but I cannot share that with you, and here's why. And if you start with those 3 things, everything becomes hopefully a lot simpler.
No, definitely. I smile a little bit there as well when you said about daft questions, because I often think daft questions are sometimes the best, because it reveals a lack or complete understanding of a question and of a situation. And I always think back to a little story a client told me, and he's a well-known chair of pension fund boards here in the UK. And he refers back to a time when he was working as an investment consultant. And he said the weather was dreadful, there was snow, the fund manager who was meant to be giving a presentation couldn't get to the board meeting to give his presentation. So the chairman who was the investment consultant at the time, he said to the chair and to the board, he said, well, let's do a training session. Let's do a Q&A. It's a perfect opportunity for you to ask all those daft questions you've always wanted to ask and were never quite sure of. So let's do a training session. So the chairman of the board who was advising turned around and said, well, what I would really like to know, and I've heard this phrase all the time from you and from the fund managers, but what I really like to know is, what is an equity? And this was a chairman of a significant multi-billion pound pension fund. He said it's one of those questions where he just always remembers that, and therefore makes sure he tries to explain things in as much detail as possible, even when you think people understand what you're talking about.
That's brilliant. I think the extension of that, though, Paul, is we will quite often say this when we walk into a room, prospectively with an investor that we're getting to know, is that the most dangerous person from a due diligence perspective is the person who has no assumed knowledge, who does ask the question, hey, not necessarily what is an equity, but at its simplest, in no more than a sentence, could you tell me, how does your business make money? And, having asked that to people who sit in leadership positions in business, in the earlier part of my career, it's great. If people know how to answer that simplistically, they really know their business. They really know it. And the ability to teach that clearly is a sign, which is sort of a consensus understanding that if somebody can teach, then they really know their subject. If somebody can simplify something and make it accessible for the masses, then they really have a genuinely excellent grasp of their topic.
I'll change tact a little bit now, Jamie, and ask you about COVID. Obviously, it's had an impact on every business and every individual across the world with worldwide lockdowns, travel bans, etc. How has it impacted your business, and how have you gone from working in a predominantly office environment to, whilst you were in lockdown, predominantly a home-based environment, and how did you make that work for you as an organization?
Yeah, great question. We obviously have had a different experience here in Australia, and particularly here in the state of Victoria in Australia, to the rest of Australia, and certainly to the UK and mainland Europe. So we had a very restricted lockdown period fairly early, and for pretty much a 5-month window last year, we were geographically restricted, and so as a consequence of that, as you rightly identify, we were restricted to working from home only. We elected as a business not to seek exemption from that. We possibly could have. We were aware of peers that did, but we were completely comfortable with the execution of our business remotely. Now, one of the reasons for that is that we had a fairly flexible work practice set up prior to COVID. So we've had people working from home since we started the business. So in terms of the logistics and people's familiarity with it, business as usual. The key thing here, obviously, and we've spoken about this, was how does one maintain organizational health? How does one look after one's people when you can't sit across the table? And we like to do that by in Melbourne, you take coffee and you take coffee regularly. And so we were unable to take coffee together, to take a whites of their eyes check on the team, to eat together, which we do frequently. We like to do that, and just to spend time, with each other. So I'm clearly making a very distinct representation here between the work that we perform, carried on as per usual, absolutely no change for us, and the health of our employees and our organizational health. And that was really where, like so many other people, we focused a huge amount of our resource. Now, some of that was reallocation of resource. So, as an example, my own time was pivoted. So I increased, I allocated 30% of my time to internal people. And that was doing things like, oh God, I cringe as I think back, but running a quiz. We did things like virtual wine taste. We did all that soft stuff in recognition of not just were we as an organization missing out on spending time together, but equally just more broadly, people couldn't go down to the local wine bar or to the pub and have a glass of something with their friends. And so you can never replace that. And, we're aware of our role within people's lives. We're just a part of it, but we really focused on those things. Food parcels to the family. We did lots of soft things like that. Then we implemented very quickly a mental health awareness program, and we took an outsourced provider and we rolled that out. We put time in everybody's diary from a Friday afternoon onwards. And to start with, we said, that's free time. That's yours. That you invest that in yourself. If you need to do whatever it is that you need to do at home, if you want to undertake to do sports within your 5-kilometer radius, if you want to hang out with the kids, if you want to watch Netflix, whatever that is, that's cool, but that's up to you, as long as you are not working on a Friday afternoon. Then as we got the feedback from people of, hey, that's great, but I kind of want to do something on that Friday afternoon. Would be cool to do something with everybody else. So that's when we rolled out the mental health program. And it was very much, we moved from self-awareness through mindfulness, through steps for personal growth, through awareness of mental health issues in the community. And we rolled out a 12-week program where every Friday afternoon we would come together, granted on a Zoom. Some of it was instructor-led. Some of it was interactive. There was some fun stuff that the provider gave to us, but that gave real commonality of something which we did together, which wasn't about our work. And we feel that worked incredibly well. And certainly the feedback from the team was that that worked incredibly well. Post lockdown, I would say that our readjustment now is around making sure that everybody is comfortable and coming back into the office, and hygiene and practical considerations aside, which those are non-negotiables. They're imposed by the state here. You're traveling with a face mask, et cetera, personal space restrictions within the office. So we actually increased the amount of floor space that we had to make people feel comfortable with the amount of room that they had to work in. So there were some practical / hygiene considerations, but then it was about, hey, what's this transition period look like? Are you comfortable coming into the office? You used to come on the train. Do you want to come on the train still? Or, is there another way that we can think about you perhaps increasing the amount of work from home time that you do so that you are comfortable when you do come in, traveling at different times of the day? We've got some employees that, and still come in far earlier and leave before the end of what's, a standard working day, so that they avoid those peak times on public transport. Real focus on people again.
So if I bring you back to leadership qualities, what do you think are the most overrated leadership qualities?
I think it has a place, but I think it's incredibly overrated. And I think it's the notion of leadership defines a top-down strategy for business. We sort of unpacked that. My conviction is in vision, strategy, tactics, and I genuinely believe in that waterfall. But I think people can become leadership can become incredibly myopic on strategy, and spend an inordinate amount of time coming up with plans and contingency plans, and become really fixated on the execution of a strategy, which may be a brilliant strategy at any one point in time, but unless that strategy evolves, and in a business as dynamic as the one that we run here, we are evolving every single day. So I think I don't want to misrepresent that I believe it's an overrated, but I think the amount of resource that's allocated to it and its importance is overrated. It is a key tenement of running a successful business strategy, of course. I think from a leadership perspective, it's more about the vision. I think more about having the right people with you to be able to execute, buy into, and further that vision, them to define strategy, and then really at that tactical level. I think there's an awful lot more that can go on there to drive a business such as ours.
I've got one last question today then, Jamie. And again, I ask everybody this because I accept that I'm not perfect myself. Is there a question I haven't asked that you would ask of yourself if you were the interviewer?
Paul, I would challenge you to ask a question to everybody that you interview in this manner. And that would be to challenge them to share with you how they continue their leadership journey. We've kind of thrown a few things around, and it's difficult, as we said a couple of times, not to talk about leadership and sound cliched. And there's, the cliches are cliches kind of for a reason. But when you're first handed a title, that's not being handed leadership. Leadership is this responsibility, and it starts sometimes with a title. Very often it starts clearly, a long way ahead of that. People assume leadership before they have a title, but that's just really, that's the journey in its infancy. So what do your guests do to continue that journey? And for us as an organization, again, I keep coming back to this notion of organization and of people and of growth and of vision. For us to recognize our vision, everybody in the organization has to grow. It isn't about one person sat at the top saying, you do this and you do this and here's the vision and, I'm just going to sit back here. Leadership, by definition, has to evolve if the business wants to evolve. So how, and I recognize now you're going to ask me this question almost certainly, how Absolutely. Do you, as a leader, to continue to grow?
So I ask you that question then, Jamie.
Yeah, absolutely.
You could be the first to answer this one.
I've made my bed and now I'm flying.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we've talked about some of the continual learning that we do here right across the organization, and that's no different for any of our leadership team. So the commitment to leadership, to start with, I think the recognition is harder. You have many things at your disposal when you come into one of these positions that you've not had previously. And the trap that you must never fall into is thinking that you are the finished product. As we said, you're just at the start. So what do you do? How do we, as our leadership team, how do we commit to that? We meet as a leadership team and we are brutally honest with each other. So I would say bordering on, the Ray Dalio style of brutal transparency. And it's a safe place. So from the micro, hey, you jumped the queue in the coffee cart the other morning and we had some guys from the team who were behind you. That's a terrible example to set. No, you didn't do it on purpose, but stop that, through to, hey, this component of our long-term vision, this strategic piece or this tactical piece, I feel uncomfortable about it. And I want you to know that I think that, you're not doing the right job. So firstly, within our leadership circle, brutal transparency, honesty. That's the first place. A commitment to self-evolution and learning. So regularly we will, and this is right across the organization, if there is an interesting reading, an article, a book, a podcast that somebody has picked up on, making the commitment that if somebody takes the time to share that, you will endeavor to pick up on that learning. It's a shared learning. It's a great thing, and it brings nice commonality. So that's the commitment to continue to learn. And then I think supplementing that with the external learning that you have to recognize is incredibly important. So your colleagues and your peers can take you so far, but yeah, I'm sure you and a lot of the people listening and watching this will be familiar with the book $1 Trillion Coach. The $1 Trillion Coach was a guy whose name eludes me, forgive me, but he was a high school football coach who ended up being a management coach guru, if you like, to some of the CEOs in Silicon Valley, who at the time were running some of the most powerful companies in the world. So this guy was a mentor, a coach to Tim Cook, to Steve Jobs, to Larry Page, to Sergey Brin, to people who are recognized as incredible leaders, incredibly visionaries in their own right, but they had the self-knowledge to recognize that they were only still on the journey and that they needed some external help to help them obligate their responsibility as a leader. So I would say external would be the last component of that I'd speak to continue that journey.
No, absolutely. And thanks for that recommendation. I think I'll have to pick up the $1 Trillion Coach book. I'd heard of it, but never actually come across it. So I'd heard the title, but never come across it. So I think I'll pick that one up and read it then.
It's a good read.
Definitely. But Jamie, thank you very much for your time today. It's been great to have you on the show.
Paul, thanks to you. It's been a pleasure to be here and lovely to have a chat with you.